You
All
are
right.
live.
I'm going to call this meeting to order of the Affordable Housing and Community Equity Development Commission, April 28, 2022. And with us tonight, Commission member Nancy Lipson, Terry Bond, Commission member Pat Sheridan and Elijah Hart Blaine were unable to attend. And we also have some distinguished guests with us tonight, Eric Lashinsky and Jackie Rouse, Denise Ruffin and Teresa Wellman of the City of Annapolis. So thank you very much for being here tonight. We do appreciate it. I'm going to start with housekeeping by approving our February meeting minutes. They were emailed to you in mid-March sometime. Is there a motion and a second to approve the meeting minutes of February?
So moved.
I'll second it.
And all those in favor say aye.
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 Great, meeting minutes are approved. Very good. So major topic for tonight's meeting is discussion of affordable housing legislation. And I'm very excited to be here to have the discussion tonight and look forward to doing so. And once again, Jackie and Eric, thank you for taking the time to be here tonight to help us and aid us in our discussion. We appreciate it. I thought before we get started, I thought it would be good just to provide sort of an overview and a summary about how we got to this point and sort of where we are in the overall process, just to sort of set the table. And hopefully all this sounds familiar to everybody, but just to kind of summarize it all.
True.
So last year, in conjunction with the HACA consent decree, the Affordable Housing and Community Equity Development Commission, our commission, was tasked with reviewing Anne Arundel County's workforce housing legislation, Bill 5419. And we were asked to review it for adoption of something substantially similar in the city of Annapolis. So we spent a lot of time last year doing some research and having many discussions, and that all culminated last fall with the commission providing a zoning legislation recommendation to the city's Housing and Human Welfare Committee, chaired by Alderman Dwan Gay. As a follow-up to that recommendation that was made, city staff was asked to, put it on paper, to draft an ordinance that, in effect reflects the intent and purpose of the recommendation that the commission had made to HHW. And that in fact is what we have here before us this evening. That's what we're going to talk about this evening, is now this draft ordinance. And as you no doubt, I'm sure if you all reviewed it, you see that it is fairly technical in nature, in that it proposes, changes to certain zoning code provisions. So therefore, we're very happy to have both Jackie and Eric with us tonight. Jackie is the primary author of the ordinance, and Eric too was involved in its creation, and to sort of walk through the ordinance with us tonight, to talk through sort of parts and pieces of it, so that we all sort of have a common understanding of what it is that it says. Now, the expectation is for the commission to, either tonight or more likely at some point in the future, after possible further revisions, recommend that the ordinance go to the Housing and Human Welfare Committee, so that that committee can consider it for adoption by City Council. So is there any questions sort of about the history, about, where we've been, or about where we think we're going?
I think you summed it up perfectly, and what we it reflects what we recommended. So, okay. I mean, I think that's good. It pretty much, but I think I'm glad that Eric is here and Jackie, so that they can help us understand exactly which portions of the zoning code they've actually recommended changing.
Right. And so actually what we were going to do is we'll share the screen so that we can,
oh, okay, good.
Together. And really what I would love, Jackie, if we could share that screen, and then we can sort of walk through it and then ask questions as we're going through it. Julian, I'll attempt to do that. And if I fail, then maybe you can help me.
I'm ready. If you need me.
Okay. I think I might be able to do that. All right. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Yep.
All right, very good. So, of course, this is a draft template. So obviously it doesn't have a, a number yet, or, co-sponsors, all that will be filled in. And again, the idea tonight is for, us to understand what now has been put on paper, and, how that really matches up to what we had intended to recommend to the HHW committee. So Jackie, let's start with first understanding what this is doing is making changes to chapters 2148, which is the use tables. And our commission, we had sort of gone at this from the standpoint of plan development code, and making changes to plan development code in order to facilitate affordable housing development. And instead, it looks like that you're going through this table of uses. If you could just kind of explain why and
Well,
that approach, that would help.
okay. So initially, I think Kathy and I had several conversations about somehow amending the plan development. The plan developments, the city has these different types of plan development that are supposed to provide a flexible approach to development in different zoning districts. And there are 3 different types: and residential, business, and special mixed. And some of them are allowed in certain districts, and some of them are allowed in other districts. And they do allow exceptions to the uses that are allowed in that zoning district, and they vary from depending on what type it is. And then they limit how much of the lot can be occupied by that approach. And I guess when we really first started seriously looking at this was the Willows project that's been proposed, in which we have an application for Forest Drive. And, they're coming to us and saying that in order for them to do, and they have apparently been approved for their tax credits, but in order for them to get the kind of density that they need in order to make this a viable project, according to them, from a financial point of view, they need a variant. They need a different height limit than you can get through the plan development process. It all gets very technical. So, and they also had to somehow turn that into a special mixed plan development. And it's really becomes, after a while, like you're trying to modify a project to make it work under the zoning. And what we really want to do is create opportunities where we have the most flexible possibilities in terms of zoning to get workforce housing in different areas of the city, not on just any one particular property. So I think the plan development regulations are very complicated and hard to understand, and they really just over control actually where you can do your use exception uses, etc. So this approach would just add workforce housing as a permitted use subject to standards. And you can see that we're actually proposing adding it to all of the residential districts, regardless of what the underlying zoning is in terms of types of units, like in your R1, R1A, R1B, and R2, R2NC. Those are all districts where you're only allowed to do single family dwellings. There are NC1 and C1A where you can do some multifamily there. So they all have different characteristics. And we've also added it to all of the B districts, the commercial districts, except for the I1, and also to we have a third category of districts that we call that are the office districts and mixed use, and that's the P, MX, PM, and C2P. Like MX is Inner West Street that goes out to Taylor Avenue, for example. So, and then the only districts that were really the only category of districts that we're not adding workforce housing to is our maritime districts, for obvious reasons. So, as a permitted use subject to standards, it would then have, so that's what happens in 2148. But then when
So
you
let-
have a,
Jackie, let me stop you right there. So this would apply to these zoning districts that are listed here.
Uh-huh.
And Land Development Code already incorporates all of these zoning districts.
not
Rent
necessarily.
Well, at least for the residential, it does, correct? So as of
No, I
right,
don't even, no, I don't think that planned developments are even allowed in all of, I think there are some residential districts. I don't think you can do a planned development in a C1 or a C1A. I have to go back and do a different analysis to give you an answer to that.
I thought I had checked the residential, not the Cs, but the Rs. And
These
that,
are residential. C1 and C1A are residential.
okay.
They're
Yeah,
the residential downtown districts. So
Okay.
they're not, see, unlike in the county where a C district is a commercial district, in the city, a C district means conservation. And the C districts are the original historic district designations for housing districts. C1 and C1A are the original and added residential districts for the historic district. C2 and C2A were the original business districts downtown.
so I guess I wanted to just clarify that this, what is being proposed, right now, there is major site development that is allowed under the Plan Development Code within several residential districts. So I think it would be good just to check that this is matching up to what is currently allowed in terms of major site development in residential areas, that this doesn't change that.
Well, this is a totally different type of thing than a planned development. I mean, this is geared towards allowing workforce housing with the tax credit in all these districts. If somebody didn't want to do workforce housing, they could do a planned development with like say in an R1 district, like take the WMNAV property, which I believe is zoned R1, if I'm not mistaken. You could do a planned development there. Your overall, okay, so you have a 10-acre site there, but the maximum density that you could get on that site, even with your use exception, is going to be controlled by the minimum lot size in an R1 district, which is 7,000 square foot per dwelling unit. I think that's how the density, it's just a whole different approach. It's like comparing apples and oranges to compare the planned development regulations with this.
I might be.
And I don't know why we're doing that.
Kathy, I think was using you. Kathy, you weren't referring to planned development. So you were saying you were just trying to confirm that each of these districts can support major site development. That's the term you were using, but I'm not sure I understood what you were.
Is that what you wanted?
Were you referring to planned developments or something else?
Well, I understood that as the code is currently written, the way in which major site development takes place in the city is through the Plan Development Code.
Primarily.
Okay, and that Plan Development Code is allowed in certain residential areas. And I was just getting at that.
Residential areas, it's allowed in commercial districts,
Right.
and it's
It's-
allowed in a lot of different districts, but so there are residential plan developments, special mixed plan developments, and there are business plan developments. And you can, even with the business plan development, you can do some residential uses, but not all three types are allowed in all zoning districts. It varies.
Terry,
So-
did you say something?
Yeah, because I think I know where Jackie's going with this, maybe. Well, our back of the envelope analysis showed that if anybody wanted to get any density, they were going to go planned development route. I think you're using maybe a different route that could get them density that planned development may not get them now. And
Right.
that's why, yeah.
That's where I'm going with this. And
That's
I
what I
think
thought, yeah. And
I think-
that's good. That gives flexibility that what you're saying, they don't even have now less steps to jump through. So that's good.
Yeah.
right, you will still have to have a public hearing with it, even though it's a permitted use subject to standards. it still requires major site design review, and all major site design reviews have to go to the planning commission for public hearing. Well, plan developments also have to go to the planning commission for review and approval, and they're actually another type of permitted use subject to standards. But this actually, I think, is a shorter route. It's a more flexible route to achieve workforce housing. Now,
Right. Okay.
there will be times when, and this does require you to do workforce housing. This is geared to doing workforce housing.
So let's
Whereas
go.
with the
Right,
plan
so let's go.
development, you could do a residential plan development that has no workforce housing, and then you might, but with that you would have to do MPDUs. With this, you're just doing workforce housing.
Okay. Okay. So I just wanted to
Yeah,
make the statement that
I'll think of a better answer to that. That's not a question I had thought about having to go through, but we can certainly look at that whole issue, and we can come back and say, well, in these districts you could do this and that, but we could come back with some summary that explains in more depth what the differences are. I think but I guess in a way, I think it's a sidetrack, and then we get like you've taken the spur train there.
I think it's good to understand why these specific zoning districts are being plucked out. That's all.
I added it to all the districts to make it.
Yeah.
There was no plucking out here. It was really based more on it being inclusive of just about every area of the city to widen the areas of opportunity to do workforce housing. That was really the impetus for picking all the districts.
It makes sense to me. It definitely makes sense to me.
And obviously, the way zoning works, the way stuff works is once we get it, it gets introduced to city council. Once it gets through being vetted by you, and then it will get vetted by housing and human welfare, then presumably several of the aldermen will say, well, we want to sponsor this legislation, and they take it to the law to have it reviewed and vetted by them, and then it gets introduced, and then it's really starting on then it gets referred back to planning commission, and it gets referred to rules and city government, because rules and city government always fits amendments to the zoning code. And it may get referred back to housing and human welfare. There are standard committees that legislation always gets referred to, but aldermen can also request that legislation be referred to other committees as part of the process, and then all those committees have to report out and recommend on it as part of the review process. So it gets introduced at council, and that's called first reader. It gets referred to everybody. The planning commission on legislation like this would have a public hearing. When they have public hearings, they leave them open. They do virtual meetings. So they leave public hearings open to the following meeting, so that if people watch the meeting and want to make comments about something that's been presented, they can still turn in their comments. And then they have the second phase of their public hearing, and then they deliberate. They decide if they're just going to recommend approval to the city council of legislation. Sometimes they recommend approval with amendments. They have things that they want added or changed in legislation. They're doing findings right now on a piece of legislation where they have several amendments, and we send that all back up to City Hall, and then it gets scheduled for public hearing before the City Council. And then after the City Council has its public,
I think we got it.
Yeah,
All right. Here, you have a question.
it's a
Go
long
ahead.
involved process.
So this is my question. I don't know if it's possible, because one thing we've talked about, Jackie, is doing taking a piece of property and developing it in different ways, showing what the zone, like, so we take a property, I don't know if you can do this for the Willows, but you take a property and you develop it like it was going to be developed under planned unit development, which we think, right now gets the most density. And then under this, the ordinance that you're proposing. So part of, I guess, being able to analyze this is seeing how it would work on the ground, what it would
Okay,
need.
yeah,
And I
that's
think that's probably in your standards, because that's what's going to make
Yeah,
a
so
difference.
let's, I think that's right. So
Well,
let's keep
one
going.
of the things
instead
that
of-
Tom Smith and I have planned to do is to actually sit down with the Willows project, which has been submitted. And as I understand it, the Willows project the application that's been introduced has a couple of issues
Yeah,
with
and
zoning
Jackie,
compliance that will require it to be modified. But we were going to take this legislation and apply it to that property and see what it got us.
Okay.
We were
Yeah,
going to do
but
it.
I really do want to avoid getting too deep talking about
Okay.
one specific project or.
No, I'm just responding to her
Okay.
question.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any site would do, but there's a proposal for that site. That's all, Kathy. I'm sorry.
Yeah, we could do
I
it with any
want
site.
to respect the developer, in that too, because, right. Okay.
I think it's a good idea when we do legislation to vet it out by actually, gaming it out on a random site to make sure that it actually works. I think that's a really important part of the process.
So these are the
Okay.
standards, right, with which you'd.
Yeah,
be
the-
subject to.
The standards are the thing that we really need to focus
Okay,
on.
so the standards in this are based largely upon what the county has in their legislation for workforce housing. That was my base model. So many of these standards, all the standards under B, which have to do with home ownership and
So
unit
let's-
transfers and
well,
all of
let's
that.
go
That
through
all
them.
is based on what the county, because that was part of what I understood was the mission here, was that why can't we have legislation for workforce housing like the county? I think that and I can't answer these questions, but I think Teresa and Kathy can about the tweaking of some of the terminology in
So-
B so that it relates more to the city. And I think we should come back to that and discuss, because I think Teresa had some comments about that. But let me just walk through all of it. So then C is the bulk regulations. So what we've said in here is that the density, setbacks, and height requirements shall be governed by the bulk regulations for the R4 district. And if you want to see what those are, I can send you a cross-reference for the, actually, I will probably add to this. I will probably add a code section, cross-reference the actual code section into. That's always a good idea to do. But essentially what they allow you is that the cool thing about the R4 zone in terms of this stuff is that there's no height limit in the R4 zone. So you can do like a 4-story structure. You can do, you're not limited. In all our plan developments, we have a height limit. And through the plan development process, the one thing that the Planning Commission cannot vary is height. They can adjust setbacks. They cannot adjust height. So that's one of the critical things in here, because what we're finding out with this is in order to get of density that's necessary for workforce housing, you need to be able to do something that's more than 3.5 stories.
So Jackie, all right, so right now we're on C number 1. So the first one is, if we could just go through each of these bulk regulations one by one, I think it would be helpful for me for sure. So this is maximum coverage may not exceed 65% of the gross area of the lot. Can you just,
Well,
why
that's right.
65%?
That really is based on what something in the county. That's something that we may change. I haven't had a chance to sit down and talk, and Tom and I may look at that and say, well, maybe we should have it be, it's a number, because you have to, you would have stormwater management. You need, a lot of sites are going to have landscape buffer requirements. It's just a limit to how much of the property can be covered by structures and parking. But that could be adjusted through this whole review process. It's not one that I'm wedded to. It was just a number to begin with for conversation. But it's really based on what the county was. mandating with their,
Carrie, you're on mute. You're on mute.
no, that was me. It was Ellie.
I'm talking
Alderman
to
Tierney
Okay.
calling.
So I have two questions. What, in terms of what's the maximum allowable coverage in any of the residential zones right now?
I don't know the answer to that. I can, if you want, so what if you have, we can make a list of questions.
Well, no, I'm just, because one of the comments that came from one of the members was that he thought that was kind of low. And no, excuse me, I want to get it right. That in other words, you should be allowed to do more coverage.
Well, that's, so.
No,
so-
Jackie, I'm just trying to figure out what the current situation is, but you're saying you don't know what the maximum is. I mean, it's
Off the
60.
top of my head, we'd have to go back. There are so many
Okay.
variable factors.
Well,
determine
I think it's
much
important to
lot-
acknowledge we don't have that in our, that's not an attribute of our bulk standards, lot
Well,
coverage.
It is in some of our zones, Eric.
It is in some, okay.
Yeah.
But Eric's saying we may not even need it.
No, that's not what I'm,
Oh,
what I
it's
was,
not- okay.
no, what I was trying to say is that, when I was just going through the residential standards, it's not, the ones that I was looking at did not have a column for maximum lot coverage. They have setbacks, they have, minimum lot size, they have minimum lot width, but that's just not one that I saw across a lot of the existing residential districts. But
Well, we'll put a little star next to that then. Like
Yeah, that's one I
we'll
think
make a
we-
list of
we wanna-
questions that we can circle back on. And so that'll
Right.
be.
I think that's definitely one we want to go back and circle on and say, do we need this, or do we have other aspects of our whole review process, like forest conservation and buffer requirements, yada, 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 and that will control maximum lot coverage.
Okay. So then number
Okay.
2 is the density. This is what you were talking about, I think previously, about R4 zoning. So the density, setbacks, and height requirements shall be governed by the bulk regulations in R4 zoning. So what are the density, and you said there's no height requirements for R4 zoning. What are?
Okay, so I can pull that. I'm going to have to open up the code to pull up those regulations. If you just bear with me for a minute, I can pull up open up the code on my iPad and go through those. Okay, bulk base district regulations, bulk regulations R4. So in the R4 district, you need 1,700 square feet of lot area for multifamily and single family attached dwellings. So I think it works out if you divide 1,700 into 43,560, around 25 units per acre. I can multiply that out for you in 1 second, I think. The setbacks requirements. So the setback requirements are going to be based on setbacks. If you're building a multifamily project, the setbacks are going to be measured at the perimeter of the lot. So you have there are minimum lot widths and minimum front yards. So like a minimum front yard setback is like 20 feet. Interior side yard is 5, corner side is 10, a rear is 30. So but those in a project like this for a multifamily dwelling would be measured from the perimeter of the site. There's no height limit. There is no lot coverage limit in R4. There is a floor area ratio limit of 2.0. And what that means is if you have like a 40,000 square foot lot, you can essentially have 80,000 square feet of building on that lot.
And so
Of course.
why choose the R4 for?
Because
It-
it's
it-
the
It's the
district that
most
allows,
permissive.
it's the
Okay.
most permissive residential district we have in terms of density requirements.
Yeah.
Unlike,
I
okay,
think
so
it worked.
if comparing it to, say, the county, an R2 district in the county is 2 units per acre. The numbers actually mean something. R10 is 10 units to the acre. Cities is not like that. Those numbers, the R1, 2, 3, 4, they have no relationship at all to how many units you can do per acre.
Right.
So,
Didn't
so
there-
that's why you have to go to the bulk tables to figure out what the actual density is.
Jackie, did I hear you say that there's no lot coverage requirement in the R4?
Not under the R4 district. Lot coverage becomes a function of, once you apply setbacks to a,
Right. So all I'm saying is that we may not need one, C1, if we're going to be using the R4 standards.
yeah, we may not.
Okay.
And that's why we can go back and look at that again. I
Because they
think,
would conflict. Right now, they would conflict because we were saying 65,
Right.
and we got to follow it. So.
Different.
well, we can go back and
There's
look
other
at
things that conflict. It's just, this is a different use, so it's, that's gonna govern, it's gonna override what we're talking about for R4.
If we
So-
wanted to, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, that just, as written right now, I mean, the standards for, what that Jackie's created for the, for this type of housing would, they're kind of based on the R4, but not exactly. I mean, that's what she's tweaked it to kind of be a hybrid, between the
Okay.
county's guideline and our R4 guidelines, so.
Yeah.
right. So
Because
you
number
look at-
two, right, number two right now is just picking out 3 of the requirements in R4, density, setback, and height. That's all you're referencing in number
Mhm.
2.
uh-huh.
So it would, right, so it's not referencing lot coverage, it's referencing the density, the setback, and the height.
Right, there is no lot coverage restriction in the R4 district, though.
So,
Okay, it's okay. Yeah, it's okay.
so, but the point being, this was chosen because it's the most permissive of the.
Right,
density.
that was the sole reason for picking R4. It's, that if you go, RR3 only allows a density of 12 units per acre,
Okay,
which is way too low to do workforce housing.
all right, now this next one, which is labeled D, that actually should be number 3, right?
No, that's a new topic. It's not a bulk regulation. C is bulk regulations. D is
Okay.
common open space.
Okay,
So
so can you talk through a D?
common open space is actually modeled on a requirement that we have a type of housing that's allowed in the multifamily housing that's allowed in the BCE zone. 1900 West Street was built under the regulations in the BCE district that, and this was a component of that legislation and this just creates a common open space requirement and gives it some definition in terms of what would be acceptable, an acceptable amount of common open space for this type of development. In our plan development regulations, there are requirements depending on what type of development it is for common open space, but it's an undefined thing pretty much in our plan development regulations. These regulation, this section, if you could scroll up a little bit, actually sets out some parameters for what it would have to be. Sometimes with developers who are doing housing where they're trying to get the maximum density and what they present to us in terms of what they think should be acceptable common open space for a project is pretty substandard. So the idea here is to set out some parameters for something that will really provide useful common open space to the project in terms of it being accessible to the residents, for it being, accessible to them, for it being of sufficient size and quality to provide them with a meaningful amenity. And it says all of these things in here, like including parking lot, landscaping, and buffers. We've had developers who've come in and they've wanted to include that in their common open space. So what we're setting this at 10, and this has nothing to do with having landscape buffers or providing stormwater management or landscaping in your parking lots. This is providing area like for some developments, it might be that you're providing, a tot lot or some kind of recreational amenity. It could be that you're providing a clubhouse. I think we've included in here a provision that it doesn't all have to be outside space. If you look under 4, it could be a community meeting room, some kind of indoor recreational facility. Teresa, what's the project out off of Forest Drive where we have the clubhouse that was built as part of that development? And then the city took it over. Is that Annapolis Walk? Anybody?
Yes, that was.
It was the Annapolis Walk. So, it depends. And a lot of this will become a function of how big the community is and all of the particulars of how that is utilized and all would become part of the whole review of the project. So that's the impetus for having some parameters for what is common open space. Also, this is something that if you all have input about something that you don't think is appropriate or you want to tweak it, we are open to all suggestions. I mean, you're the housing experts and, you have a whole different viewpoint on looking at stuff like this, and we really welcome the input. So
Eric,
that's
anything
what
to
that's
add
all about.
about this?
And you can email us comments after the meeting. I think we should have we don't have to, everybody can think about this, and maybe Kathy, you want to set a deadline for submitting additional comments, so that we can keep it moving.
Yep.
Up to
Yep.
you.
Eric, I just wanted Eric a chance to weigh in on anything on this.
No, I mean, I think it's an excellent solution. I just wanted to drive home the point that we're typically pretty hampered in terms of changing zoning regulations unless there's an explicit recommendation to do so in our comprehensive plan, which we are working feverishly to do right now, but it's still going to probably be, it could be another, portion of a year before that's adopted. So this is a sensible workaround, given that I think housing affordability is kind of an existential crisis for the city right now. I do want to underscore that that's part of why we're here and making this kind of legislation, that given the cost of land and the limited amount of land that we have, we don't have a whole lot of options to make housing affordable within the city. And we, as much as we want to work with the county to create affordable housing outside of the city, we sort of have to be agents of change here. So we're doing what we can, and this is what the city has to work with in terms of, we can't change land costs. We can't we can't make developers develop in a we can't change their pro forma, so to speak, or but we can impact things by changing the rules that govern the land development. So
Okay.
yeah.
Terry, did you have a question?
Yeah, and this is silly because I can only see part of the legislation. I did look at it quickly before we got together. But the common open space, we're not talking about single family detached housing, because I think, or townhouses, are we? What are we talking about? Every affordable housing development has to have common open space, or only the multifamily?
If you're doing a workforce housing project, which I conceivably the legislation is designed to accommodate
Multifamily.
increased density. I can't imagine a project that would come in where somebody would say, well, I could, under the how you could do a single family workforce housing project, because you know, in order to get the density, you're going to have to it's almost like you're going to have to do multifamily.
Yeah.
So actually, but this is just how old I am. When I first got into planning, multifamily didn't include townhouses. Townhouses were considered single family attached.
But you could do
This
single
stuff.
family attached.
Yes.
That's one of the,
And would you require common open space with
Yes.
single family attached?
yes.
Okay, I'm just throwing that out there because I don't know that
Absolutely.
that's what we were thinking, but I'm just putting that out there.
With either townhouses or what you would call traditional multifamily, which is, you know, like, you know, apartment type housing, with either one of those, you could do a duplex workforce housing project. The common open space, you would have to, the 10% of the entire property would have to be your common open space.
So I want the group to think about what that would mean, because the thing is, we want to get density. Do you need that with every single type of workforce housing? That's just a question I wanted to put out to the group to think about. That's all.
Well, you know, think if you're doing common open space and you know, you want there to be some place where the people who live in those units, even if they're townhouse units, have a place where they can, you know, they can have like do outside things. I think that we would want to encourage that for health reasons and for
Right.
I guess I'm just putting the conversation out there because because with small developments, it becomes onerous to have to pay for taking care of that and for everything else. We have a lot of parks in the city. We have a lot of schools with open space. I guess I'm just putting out the conversation about what kinds of open space, smaller developments, that the non-multifamily. It's just out there. It's just a question I have. That's all.
I mean,
well, maybe Eric has input on it based on his
I was going
recreation
to say,
park maps.
well, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Jackie, but I think your intent was to give them a way of meeting outdoor space more efficiently than if every unit had their own dedicated outdoor space. You know, like I'm just imagining in a situation where you have, you know, it's a quality of life consideration, but
Right.
we certainly want to be efficient about it. And I can imagine a scenario where you have townhouses, and each has a small garden bed in the front or the back, and it's adds up to the same amount as this common open space. And, you know, maybe it is
Well,
more desirable, but
even
I
with
don't know.
townhouse projects in plan developments, townhouse plan developments, we require common open space, and we actually would require a greater amount than is required under this. I mean, 10% is actually a fairly small amount if you're looking at the total property, but
Yeah.
I think that outdoor space for family and for a variety of reasons, not even just the outdoor space, having a community meeting room or a clubhouse or place where, you know, like if you look at Annapolis Walk, how the clubhouse is used there by the communities, and that it's really an important component of day-to-day life, that for people's mental and physical and emotional health, to
Yeah.
have usable outdoor space that would be
The,
beyond of having, and if you're living in if it's an apartment building and there's no common open space, you have no recreational space.
Yeah, that is
Although Eric,
definitely.
I mean, we can revisit this all. Okay. So the other thing that to pick up on something that Eric said. So as Eric works through the process of getting a new comp plan adopted, and then that will be followed by an implementation plan, and new zoning will get adopted, in various, that's a long-term process. And over time, this could be something that gets replaced by something else in 3 years or 5 years, that comes out of whatever comes out of the comp plan. I mean, I see this as not, I don't think of any zoning as being a permanent solution to, and it shouldn't be. And that's one of the problems with zoning, is that too much of it has become such long-term solutions that it never get changed, is that it doesn't, it needs to be updated more frequently and respond to more, modernized and everything. But I see this as, in some ways, as an interim solution, a solution that may need to be modified after we adopt the new comp plan, and we build on the whole concept of having, changing how we approach development, where it's more about creating bulk, building envelope requirements, and it's less about numbers. Eric can talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, that's the direction we're heading in terms of form-based zoning, where we're more interested in making sure that the development is sensitive to context, and use is still relevant, but it's not as important as the shape and form of the building. A consultant we have who's working on this use the example of downtown, which is appropriate, where you have buildings that are hundreds of years old that have had a variety of uses during that time, and they're still extremely adaptable. And so that's kind of the direction when I look at this legislation, I'm thinking about the existing districts that will likely be rezoned within this form-based code in its first iteration. And those are primarily the properties that are currently zoned for commercial or office use, where we want to incentivize mixed use development and greater density of housing. I should say, more housing options. But so certainly there are a lot of these types of properties along our major transportation corridors. And like to Jackie's point about this isn't going to solve everything. One thing it doesn't do, which is just, and it's fine, it's not going to necessarily provide an incentive or provide an incentive for an existing R4 multifamily development to create affordable housing within. I think about like a place like Watergate Apartments, or some of the other multifamily exists in the city. It's not going to, it's just not providing a means for those units to become more affordable. But for all of the properties that could be redeveloped, it's certainly providing a very good tool for those properties to provide attainable housing. So,
and we do have 3 or 4 properties in the city that we know there are people looking at them to redevelop them. There's the WNAV site, which is off of Admiral Drive, which is zoned to R1, that we've had different people have looked at that. It does not work for redevelopment for a variety of reasons under the plan development regulations. We've had conversations with developers about the West 2 shopping center, which is the last shopping center as you go down West Street, on the left, which has been there for a zillion years. That, you know, and there has been discussion, preliminary discussion about doing residential development on that site. That's a more complicated project. There's the Willows project that is, you know, that has been submitted. That's a project property on Forest Drive that was annexed back in, I think it was in the 80s. I can't remember when we annexed it. It was a church annexed it in to build their church there. It never got built. And many different people have looked at it. It's a difficult site for a variety of reasons to do redevelopment on it. It's R2, so the density, even with plan development regulations, it's hard to get any significant density on that site. And as you all know, we've talked about the Spa Road sites that the city owns. I mean, so there are some examples of potential sites where we might be able to get significantly sized workforce housing projects. And so, I mean, this legislation is really, you know, sort of focused on larger scale workforce housing. And I see this not as like a perfect solution or as a one size fits all for every kind of, you know, housing at this kind of income level. I think I see it as a tool that we have the MPDU legislation, which provides some opportunity. But we also probably are going to have to look at doing some other legislation that is geared more towards creating opportunities to do infill projects in like in a neighborhood. Like, let's take West Annapolis. On a property in there, you could build a multifamily workforce housing unit there and have, you know, but that would be driven a lot by the components of the form-based zoning. And I don't even know how we would get to that point that we have, but that's, you know, that's certainly on the, you know, on the horizon of something that.
Yeah, before we start talking about other ones, let's finish this one because we haven't even gone all the way through it yet. So
this is not everything a solution. This is one thing.
Totally makes sense. It does totally make sense. I get that. All right, so E. Now, what this talks about is that there'll be initial maximum rental rates, right? And those rental rates will be established by the developer, and we need to go back to the conditions for which this would apply, because we skipped over that, which is the beginning of the ordinance. And so the developer would come up with these maximum rental rates, but then those or purchase rates, so I should say also purchase rates, those would have to be approved by the City of Annapolis Department of Planning and Zoning. So that would be a step. And then the final piece here is understanding that all of this would need to go through site design plan review, right?
And I added that requirement, although that's a given. Tom Smith asked that we actually put this into the legislation to just reinforce the fact that you have to go through site design plan review, although it would be required anyway.
And that includes adequate public facilities.
It does.
Right.
It includes adequate public facilities. It includes forest conservation. It includes, you know, traffic impact studies, which is a component of adequate public facilities. All those things would be required.
Okay. All right. And now I'm kind of doing this.
So I think that what you're saying is that we should move E up so it's up there with the after the B stuff before we get into the
yeah, maybe we could. Probably,
yeah, we can move it up. That's right. Okay.
So in terms of these standards, so in order to be eligible for you know, these types of regulations in the common space, everything we just talked about, that what is being developed would have to meet certain conditions. And so, Jack, you know, we sort of started this conversation by saying this section is really matching up largely to the county legislation.
It's the Jackie knows nothing about section.
These are coming from, right?
This is the Teresa section.
Yeah. So this first number one says that, any units that are being developed for home ownership would need to be deed restricted for 10 years. And any units being developed for rental would be deed restricted for 40 years.
Now, you realize that the deed restrictions on the MPDUs for sale units are 30 years.
Right, but that doesn't
To stay in,
relate to this.
pardon?
How does that relate to this?
Well, we have 10-year deed restriction. And so that after 10 years on the for sale, they become, then they're not restricted anymore, and the person can turn around and sell it the next day for market rate.
It sounds like you're just saying consistency would be better.
Well,
so
I'm
that-
saying consistency, and also to have the unit be affordable for a longer period of time. I mean, 10 years has gone by, poof, it's gone. And that unit is no longer affordable. So it reduces your inventory.
Right.
So you're saying that the 10 years should be more
Should be
years?
30. Should be 30 is what Teresa's saying.
I'm suggesting 30, so it's consistent with our MPDU program and keeps
Right.
the unit affordable for a longer time.
Do we know what other jurisdictions do in terms of,
Yeah, we know that most of them are, I think Montgomery County's 30.
for single family homes?
Yeah,
Okay.
What about for multi?
that's where they're like 99 years for rental.
The 10 years came out of what the county,
Right.
the 10 years is the county
Right.
standard. You can have you can propose any amount of time you want. And but I do think that if what Teresa's suggesting is that we need to be able to look, you're going to need to defend that. And by saying this is what it's always good to have like 3 or 4 other jurisdictions that require the same thing. And
Right, and I can look, I can
Right.
go, I have a spreadsheet that I did a while back that
Okay.
has all of the different Maryland. I don't have it with me and I don't have access, but I can go and look that up. But
I
Okay.
think that's a good thing to have as we take this forward to show how we're in the ballpark with everybody.
right, so I can
And
give you that information when I get back from vacation.
I also think it's important that we try to keep the housing affordable for as long as possible.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, does the MPDU have resale calculations to it? So, likely it's not going to hold on to a house, be in the same house for 30 years. And so when they
No.
sell it, they're able to collect some equity out of the house.
Right, the MPDU program bases it the same way they base it on the initial sale of the house. So, it'll go, and it's based on the HUD median income. So as the median incomes go up, the house prices goes up. They fluctuate based on the interest rate. So that they wouldn't go up that much, except for this year. I think the income rates went up quite a bit from what I'm reading. So
Okay, so just
Yeah,
like the other
I would
item-
like to, I was going to say, I would just look at Montgomery County because they've had programs like this for, 30 and 40 years.
Okay, so we'll make a note about that, to take a look at that. And then the second, of course, the 40 years for the rental units, that matches up to tax
Yeah.
credit rental program. So that works. And then number 2 talks about the income eligibility. So
Can
that, yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I just, something that, since I've been reading this, I've been a little confused, and maybe Jackie can just clarify, but is the intent that the development has at least 40% of the units that for households that don't exceed 100%, or Oh, I'm sorry. Wait a second. I misread. I think I may be thinking about a previous version. I'm sorry. Carry on. I got confused by something that I think is now clear to me.
That's the easiest question we've had the whole meeting. That's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah. No, I think I was still the
Right, so this is a 40% of them would be restricted to 100% of area median
Well-
income. And then the other 60%
So
would,
40% of the units have to meet those. If it's sale housing, 40% of the units that you build have to meet those restrictions. And two, if it's rental, 60% of the units have to meet the restrictions, the income restrictions.
right. Okay. I'm good.
I just have a question about that. To Kathy, actually. When you're doing a mixed income development, what's the mix of incomes that you'd like to see in relation to market rent versus subsidized or lower rents to make the project work in terms of, you know, when you have different,
I
when you
mean,
have market rate?
you know, it really depends. You know, if you're applying for 9% tax credits, typically you score higher by targeting lower income. So,
Oh, but, okay. But my question is, do these all have to be funded with low-income housing tax credits?
No.
yeah,
So if they don't, and a developer wants to do a mixed income project, well, maybe there wouldn't be an instance like that where a developer would do a mixed income project without any kind of,
Tax
never
credit.
mind. Yeah,
So,
probably wouldn't happen.
right. So when you get the tax credits for a project, you say what percentage of the units in your project are going to be low income, are going to meet these income restrictions. I mean, I don't understand how the tax credit application process works, because people apply for the tax credits before they even have a project. So what kind of commitments do they have to make?
yeah. So when you're applying for the tax credits, you do need to designate, you know, the number of units at each of the income levels. You need to make a commitment for that in return for the tax credits. Yeah.
And you get points for that.
For the
Right.
9%, for the 9%.
And then so you have to have, once they've approved your tax credits, you would either have to have a project that conform to that, or you would have to go back and amend your tax credit approval, or do you just go with what you asked for?
Typically you're committed to what you applied for.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when we were reviewing a project that has tax credits, we would know, you know, what they have committed to providing as part of the development project. That would be part of we'd obviously know that. Okay, that's okay.
Okay, and then number 4 just talks about this transfer of the home ownership to, I guess, the next purchaser. And just, I guess if it's within the 10-year, or if we change it to 30-year or whatever period of time it is, it would need to, you know, transfer to somebody who's income eligible.
Right.
Can I ask you another question about how the tax credit process works?
Yep.
So, does the tax credit application process, does it have, going back like to number 1 about it has to be a tax credit homeowner for this length of time? Is that part of what you have to commit to get the tax credits? Do they have those same time limits in the tax credit application? Do they have minimums?
Yeah, so in terms of low-income housing tax credit, that's a rental housing program.
And only that.
Right, except that you can get tax credits for lease purchase. which is where this
Okay.
15 years is, coming into play here. And for the rental units, they are, the state of Maryland requires a 40-year deed restriction.
40-year?
Mhm. And that's
Okay.
that's why we're referencing 40 years.
But you can't get tax credits for homeownership
No.
units unless they're
No.
leased to purchase.
Unless it's lease purchase.
Okay, so that's something that we're developing sort of like on separate numbers. I mean, I would think that the numbers we would want to have in number 1 would want to be consistent with what's required under the tax credit process, right?
Right, and that, we do say that 40 years.
Oh,
for
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm woefully ignorant about all of this complicated stuff, so.
So,
Okay,
so I think, that this section does largely match up to the county, and we can, just like we've made notations about other provisions here, we'll talk about this homeownership piece and whether that should be 10 years or something else, so.
There's
Um,
another section. Where's the section that talks about the income levels? Oh, there it is. Wait, where it says that they have to be 60% of median. No, not that one.
No, them do. There isn't any section about that, or there wasn't in the version I've read. There's nothing that has income limits for purchasers or renters in here.
So,
Oh,
number 3 says 60% of the rental units have to be occupied by a household with an income that does not exceed 60%.
That's the only one which
yeah,
is the tax.
it does not exceed, I can't see it, does not exceed
60%.
60%.
60%.
Yeah, that's
One
the
of-
one that both Patrick
Yeah.
and I had an issue with.
Right. You
Okay.
wanted to talk about raising that to 80%.
Yeah,
And that's because Section 8 housing assistance payment contracts, HAP contracts, can be up to 80%.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I think we should change that.
we have, there
Exactly.
are income limits for the home ownership units in 2.
Yes,
Right.
40%.
There are income limits for both the home ownership units and the rental units.
Yes.
I think 60% is too low.
Yeah,
For,
we're talking,
for that one.
Teresa.
You might as well have it consistent with the Section 8 program.
Absolutely.
We can change that to 8.
Yeah,
8.
I like that.
That's definitely, that's, and I misspelled adjusted there. Did you all not notice that? Did nobody misspell?
Yeah.
You know what?
I
This thing
found a
doesn't,
few others, but we don't have to go through this.
spell check doesn't do, it doesn't do spell check for some reason, and I don't know why.
Because it's all caps.
That's why it's
Oh.
only a draft, so.
Yes, this is the draft. That's a glaring error. I'm really, wow. Okay.
I didn't even notice it.
I will have to convert this all back to lowercase to do spell check and then reconvert it back to uppercase after I do
Wow.
spell check. So.
Well, Jackie,
How
we
embarrassing.
appreciate all your work on that. So really, any misspellings are easily forgiven.
Concept of, it's not a perfect concept, and Eric looked at it and Tom looked at it, and we're going to be looking at it some more, and I fully expect it to have additional edits and changes as it moves through the process. I mean, that happens with all legislation, so I've come to accept that. I used to think that could be really insulted when I wrote a piece of legislation and I just was horrified that I cried at my first planning commission meeting where I was they criticized it and I cried. I actually stood there and cried.
Oh, God.
Honest
How
to God.
long ago was that, Jackie?
It was a really long time ago, and I can remember Dr. Scott, I guess Scott came up to me after the meeting and said, it's not meant as personal criticism of you. It's all a process, but you do get really, when you write legislation, you do get really you really get attached to your own ideas. So it's, everybody, we need more, there's stuff in here that I think really benefits from a wide variety of looking at it from different perspectives.
And I think a really good note to end on here is to reiterate, Eric and Jackie, what you had said, and that, this is not meant to be a silver bullet. It's not going to solve every problem, but hopefully it facilitates some development in certain areas. And it's it also, this is a living, breathing document, and that as the comprehensive plan evolves, it may end up replacing something like this down the road, depending on sort of what direction that's going. So this is all just, we're trying to bandage together what we can to facilitate where we're able to.
Right. And I see that, but I do see this as a giant step forward in the city recognizing that we have a serious workforce housing problem, and we need to start looking at solutions that provide opportunities for workforce housing and mixed use housing and infill, housing, that missing middle housing, and all of these things. I mean, we really, just like every other area of the country, we're facing a crisis here. And the committee being behind this, and the Housing and Human Welfare, I think it's an important message to send. So it's really great that you all have embraced this with such vigor.
Well, thank you for drafting it.
Well, Kathy has been hugely supportive, and she asks a lot of questions. No, which has been really good. It's really good to work, work with you all on something. I really look forward to you all. I mean, if you go back and look at it again now that we've kind of walked through it,
Right.
and you have any questions or suggestions, email us. You can email Eric and Teresa and I, and we'll all get together and we'll talk about those things. But I do think if we could set some kind of deadline in terms, we don't want it just to linger.
No.
And we don't want it to linger while we keep tweaking at it to get it perfect.
Right.
We want to keep it moving. I mean, legislation can just, because it's going to change anyway as it moves forward. All legislation does.
Makes sense. Well, I for one, I found this conversation very helpful.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I also like the approach of making it eligible under as many categories as possible. I think that's a great approach.
You all read those plan development regulations, and then whoever wants to volunteer to explain them to me. I don't do plan. I've only ever done one plan development, most of them. I started reading what the Willows submitted as to how they met the plan development requirements. Okay, I've been doing planning for 40 years. It made my head hurt. I couldn't read. Honestly, I swear to God, I was. And then I finally called Tom and I said, Tom, you're going to have to walk me through how, because there are so many aspects of the way the plan development chapter is set up that require interpretations and decisions about policy decisions. And this is designed to not be interpretive. It's, you can do this, this, and this. And it's not designed to have a lot of, well, we're going to allow, it's not to have that kind of, which it's just designed to be clearer, easier, and more straightforward. That was totally not consistent with the rest of our zoning code, which is like a minefield of crazy.
All right. Well, thank you.
But Eric's going to rewrite the whole code so that it's no longer a minefield.
How many years do I have left to live?
We're looking forward to that. That will
I'm older than I look, Jackie.
January of 2023. Eric's going to have he's given us the code as a New Year's present.
And he's retiring in 2023 at the beginning.
Yeah, right. So,
all right.
okay, so
All right.
Kathy, do we want to set a deadline for comments?
Yeah, I think I think this conversation's been really helpful. Everyone can sort of digest what we talked about, and I'll be in touch about
Okay.
sort of next steps.
Super.
And so,
We did send this to Alderman, I did send this to Alderman Gay,
yes,
and he's really supportive of the whole idea. I'm sure he will sponsor the legislation.
so on that note, motion to adjourn.
I'm going to my other meeting, which is already in progress.
All
Sorry
right.
about that.
I have HPC also.